In today's video, we're going to be printing with some resin on my Creality halide. Now, if you've been a part of the channel for any amount of time, you'll know that I got my start with 3D printing with resin 3D printing, and this was my very first printer. However, CBD Tech, better known as Cheat2 Systems, or better yet known as Cheat2 Box, sent me over their resins to test, one being the standard 8K resin, and the other being the Conjure Rigid. Today, we're going to go through the pros and cons, the better uses for them, depending on what you're printing, and any takeaways. We're going to start off with the Conjure Standard 8K. I already printed off a couple models so that you guys can see the differences between the two, and we'll go over its case uses. This is the Spider Punk model from Wicked, and let me tell you, I am astonished by the amount of detail that comes out of this resin. I've never actually had a resin with this amount of detail, so let's go over it. Now, I will say, it was really easy to print with. I got this resin in the mail and printed this off as soon as I could, and no fails happened. I mean, these spikes even printed off perfectly. They didn't even need supports. It printed fairly quickly. It was about 8-hour print time, which is not bad. Now, they do have exposure settings on their website, which is absolutely amazing for whichever printer that you're printing with and whichever resin you decide to get from them. However, this is crazy. There's detail in the buttons, there's the belt buckle, there's these spikes on his arm, and I did slice this up in mesh mixers, so it's going to look a little different on the back, but there's no warping here, which is extremely important. The resins that I've gotten in the past, which is just your standard run-of-the-mill resin, warps fairly frequently if you cut up files. I'll show you. This is just your standard run-of-the-mill resin. Now, this is painted over. I painted over it a couple days ago. However, I printed this off a long time ago. And even when I printed it off, it took about a week for things to start cracking. I mean, look at that. Those are a lot of cracks. Now, this particular model didn't have a whole lot of warping, which is great, but this one did. This one had quite a bit of warping. You got some cracks and some warping here on the bottom. You got some cracks here. Definitely some warping on the surfboard here. Some warping here as well. And even some cracks right underneath here. I printed this model a week ago, and there's no warping whatsoever. Not even on the bottom. So let's go over the case uses for this and why you would use it and when you would use it. So the reason why you would want to use this resin is if you are trying to get very, very detailed models. This resin is astonishing at creating those details for you with ease. Now, I will say with the resins that I've purchased in the past, there is an extreme odor. This has a light odor, actually a lighter odor compared to the Rigid. I had no problem printing with this in my current apartment. I did also print another model in the 8K as well, just to put it through the ringer and see how much detail I can get out of it. This is the model from Overwatch, and it's a Diva model. However, during the filming of this, I actually broke off a piece of the arm. Now, that could be the fact that it's a thin, small model. However, I will say that compared to the other resin that we'll get to, I really like that one for reasons of maybe dropping it or fiddling with it while I'm painting, anything like that. So let's go ahead and move on to the other resin and see the case uses for that and the model that I printed for that as well. So this is the Conjure Rigid, and let me say, I'm a sucker for marketing because these bottles, these packages are amazing. And they're not just pretty, but they have a purpose. This is a spill-proof top. I mean, I can turn it upside down and shake it, and nothing's going to happen. This one, the container for this, actually keeps the resin really, really stable for about 18 months. So now that that little tidbit is out of the way, let's see the case uses for this and the pros and cons. So this is a chip clip, and it's pretty small, but it's really mighty. So let's test this out and see how rigid this rigid resin is. So we're just going to pull this, and we're going to really pull it. And I'm using quite a bit of force. As you can see there, it is completely closed and nothing is breaking. That is definitely not something I've gotten out of another resin. It's really, really strong. And I can even open it like this as well. And it works perfectly fine. It really goes to show you what this rigid resin is meant for, functional parts. So if you have a model that has a bunch of threading, it's perfect for that. These are the same chip clips, except they're scaled up to 50%. And they're failed prints. Well, sort of. So these actually broke off when I was trying to get them off the build plate. And I thought it was weird because they're supposed to be a strong resin. However, I was wrong. Because if you actually go to their website, they'll tell you that before it's cured, it is actually really, really thin. So what happened was, in an effort to try and get it off my build plate, I ended up splitting some of the pieces, as you can see here. But we'll take this bigger piece, even though that part is broken, and we'll go through, and you can still see that it is still really, really tough. So to really test the strength of this resin, we're going to bring out my handy dandy hammer. Before we get to hammering, we got to put our safety glasses on. All right, so here's the aftermath of our carnage. And as you can see, they did break. But the coolest part about this is during my hammering process, it didn't really leave any dents. It left some scratches for sure, but I can just wipe that right off. And bada bing, bada boom. That's insane. Now, yep, they did break off, but that was with a good amount of force from the hammer. Like a crazy amount. So to wrap this all up, what have we learned about G2 Systems resin? Their standard 8K resin is going to be for pulling those insane amount of details out of your models, whether it be a bigger bust like the Spider-Punk one, or a smaller detail one like this Diva mech from Overwatch. We have also learned that the rigid resin is going to be for your functional parts. So any tools, threading, anything that needs to fit together snugly, you can use this rigid resin for. Now, again, that's not to say that you can't use it for your busts or your miniatures. They'll just be extra strong. The detail is going to be about the same. You're not going to see any failure in that whatsoever. Also, they're really easy to print with. The rigid is really easy to print with, and the 8K, right out of the box, really easy to print with, no failure whatsoever. The great thing about G2 Systems is that their website is full of resources, from printer profiles to the exact settings that you need to use. They have a Facebook group. They have amazing YouTube videos on if your prints fail, here's why they fail. Me being a beginner printer, especially with resin printing, it was an amazing resource. I actually didn't even have to email back and ask any questions. Everything was there on their website. So if you want to pick up these resins for yourself, you totally can. They're running a Black Friday deal still. And the price for this resin is usually $70. $70 for 1 kilogram. Right now, it's running for $35. And this one is usually $59.99, $60, and it's running for $25. So if you want to pick these up, feel free. They're not going to run you too much. Again, they're about the same cost as running to your technology store and grabbing some resins. So if you like this video or have any suggestions, feel free to give the video a like, a subscribe. It helps the channel out immensely, and any links that you need will be down in the description below. See you guys in the next one.